Before you start watching this video, make sure you've watched Factoring Trinomials number 1 because we're going to be using some of the stuff that you learned in that video for these trinomials. The goal is that you will be able to factor trinomials into two binomials using one of these three methods, grouping, the box, and the X. And I'm actually just going to give you a little taste of each of these. And if you want to learn a little bit more, I do have videos that go into more detail for each of these three methods. The emphasis of this video is factoring when our A value, this one right here, is actually now greater than 1. And what do we do with that? We actually have a second step that we have to do. The first method I'm going to show you is the grouping method. And actually, I'm going to use the grouping method later on when I show you how to factor a polynomial with 4 terms. So it's good to learn this method. All right, I told you that when A is greater than 1, that we had an extra step. And that extra step is I'm going to multiply my A term times my C term, and that's going to be my product. So I'm not going to use the 8 at the end. I'm going to use the 40. All right, so what two numbers multiply to get 40, not the 8, but the 40, to add up to 14. All right, let me go ahead and make my little factor box. Here you go. Now, since the 8 at the end is positive, I am going to find two numbers that have the same sign. And since the B term of 14 is positive, my two terms are going to be positive. And so as you look through here, what to add up to 14? The 4 and the 10. Alrighty. So grouping does this. I'm going to rewrite the original problem, but instead of putting the middle term, I'm actually going to put the two numbers that I just found with x's. So 4x and 10x. Now, I have not actually changed the problem. I've just unsimplified it. So this 14x should equal what I just did there, the 4x plus the 10x. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to split it in half. So I have two terms on one side of the slash and two terms on the other side of the slash. And I'm going to find the greatest common factor as if they were by themselves. So what is the greatest common factor? 5x squared plus 4x. That's just an x. And so we go in the parentheses. Well, it looks like I'd have a 5x plus a 4. Now, this is just a review of what we did in a couple of videos back when we factored out the greatest common factor. All right, on the other side, I'm going to do the same thing. So what does 10x and 8 have in common? A 2. And then what goes inside the parentheses looks like a 5x plus 4. You may notice that the numbers inside the parentheses are the same, and that has to happen. If they're not the same, then you've made some sort of mistake. Okay, so now the binomial that shows up twice is going to be one of my binomials. And then you see the two terms on the outside, the x and the positive 2. They're going to be my other binomial, and I'm done. How do I check to see if I'm right? Use FOIL, and it should get back to the original problem. I'm going to do grouping one more time because sometimes when we run into negatives, we tend to have a little bit of a problem because we forget something. So here we go. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. So what two numbers multiply to get negative 6, not the negative 3, but the negative 6, that add up to negative 5. All right, let me go ahead and do my box. All righty. And I know it's going to be negative 6, so one of the numbers has to be negative, one has to be positive, so I'm going to be subtracting. And so that's going to be this one right here. And I know because my middle term, the 5 is negative, my bigger one has to be negative, and this is positive. Okay, so I'm going to write out the two terms, or write out the polynomial, adding those two in there. So instead of the negative 5x, I'm going to have plus 1x minus 6x minus 3. And again, my two middle terms better add up to the original middle term. Then I'm going to put a slash right here. I'm going to look at the first two terms and just factor out an x. That's all they have in common. So I'll have a 2x plus 1. All right, here's where the hiccup comes. Do you notice in the next two terms, the very first term is negative? That means I must pull out a negative. And then what number do they have in common? A 3. And so negative 3 times what is negative 6x? 2x. And negative 3 times what? Negative 3 is a positive 1. This is what gets people. Sometimes they forget to switch the signs as they pulled out a negative. But as you can see now, my two binomials inside the parentheses are the same. So that is one of my binomials of my final answer. And then I take the other two terms, put them together, and that is my other binomial, and I am done. Alrighty, we're going to start it the exact same way, A times C, so 7 times 12 is 84. And so I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to get 84 that add to get my middle number of negative 20. So I'm going to do my box. I'm going to pause for a sec and do it, and I'll come right back. Alrighty, there you go. And since my C value of 12 is positive, both these are going to have the same sign. And since my B value is negative, they're both going to be negative. But I'm going to add like normal. So what two numbers, when we add them together, get to 20? Well, that'd be our 6 and the 14. So I'm going to have a negative 6 and negative 14. All right, now I have to do the box. Those of you guys who multiplied using the box, this might actually be the easiest method for you because it's basically just doing the opposite of what you did. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the very first term and put it in the very first box. And then I'm going to take the last term and put it in the very last box. And then I'm going to take the two numbers that I found that multiplied up to be 84, that added to be negative 20. Doesn't matter which box I do it, but I am going to put them with x's. So there and here. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to find the greatest common factor of every row and every column. So let me get a blue pen here. So right here, this column right here, what is my greatest common factor, my GCF? Just an X. Alrighty. What about the row down here? Now again, because it starts with a negative, you got to pull a negative out. And so no X's, but it looks like a negative 2. Alrighty. Then up above, now I'm going to do my column right here. Let's see, they both have a 7 in them, and they both have an X. That's about the most I can pull out for the X's. And then finally, again, because there's negative, I'm going to pull it out, and they don't have any X's in common, but they both have a 6 in common. So there we go. Now, you can test yourself by doing some multiplication. Let's see if I can show you this with a highlighter. All right, if I multiply the negative 6 times the negative 2, would I get a positive 12? Yeah. And you should be able to do that in any of those boxes. All right, so the answer is on the sides. The x minus 2 that you see down the left-hand side, and at the top, the 7x minus 6. And there's your final answer. So that's the box method. The last method I'm going to show you is the x method, but it starts exactly the same way. I'm going to multiply my a times my c. So 3 times negative 16 is negative 48. And so I'm looking for two numbers that get to negative 48 that add to become positive 22. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make my box real fast. As I look at these numbers, I realize that to get a negative 48, I'm going to actually have to subtract the two numbers to get a 22. And so I'll notice that these two, when we subtract, become a 22. But because my b term is positive, my biggest number here, the 24, must be positive, and this is negative. All right, so here's my x. I put an x here, and I'm going to put a little x here and a little x here. And I'm going to put both those numbers, minus 2 plus 24. Now, this is the first time I've written those two numbers out where they did not have an x behind them. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the a term, and I'm going to divide each of these numbers by that number. Now, as you look at it, there's no way that 2 can be divided by 3 evenly. If that was a different number like 4 6, 3 9, I'd have to simplify it before I actually did this next step. So here's the next step after simplifying. Since this is not a whole number, the 2/3 is not a whole number, I'm going to take the denominator and I'm going to move it in front of the x. I'm going to rewrite that as 3x minus 2. So once I move it up there, he's no longer here. And then the other one, I'm just going to, 24 divided by 3 is an 8. So that is a whole number, so I'm just going to do this. And I am done. What do you think of that one? So which method did you like the best? The grouping, the box, or the X? Go ahead and try this one on your own. Pause the video, try this with one of your favorite methods, and then see how you do. Okay, did you see that we're looking for the factors of 120 that add up to get to negative 43? Since my 120 is positive, both my factors are going to be negative, and I did the factor tree, I got negative 3 and negative 40. All right, I am actually going to show you all three methods again, just using this problem. So we're going to start with the grouping method. I'm going to do 5x squared, and then I'm going to put minus 3x minus 40x plus 24. I'm going to put a slash after this one, and the first two terms, the only thing that they have in common is an x, which leaves me with a 5x minus 3. Here I do have to pull out the negative because it starts with a negative, and it has an 8. That's what they have in common is an 8. And so I'll get a 5x, And then negative 8 times what is positive 24? Negative 3. So I have an x minus 8 and a 5x minus 3. Did you do grouping, and is that what you got? Actually, that's going to be the right answer no matter what. All right, now I'm going to stop, erase this, and show you the box method. All right, in the box method, I'm going to take my first term, 5x squared, and put it in the first box. I'm going to take my last term and put it in the last box. I'm going to take the negative 3 and put it with the x. And again, it doesn't matter where I put that, negative 40x. And then I'm going to start with the first row. It doesn't really matter where you start. Just make sure you do both rows and both columns. First row, I'm going to pull out a 5 and an x. And then the next row, I'm going to pull out a negative, and it looks like just a 3. Up at the top, just an x. And over at the last column, I'm going to pull out a negative again because that's negative. And it looks like they have an 8 in common. And so again, it doesn't matter which order you put these in. And this should be the exact same answer we just got on the grouping. All right, one more. Those of you who did the x method, I'm going to show you the x method. You might have wondered why I only used this and this for the x method. That's just because they're leaving a space for you to put what you multiply, the a times c here, and then the negative 43 here. You don't have to do that. There we go. And then I have the minus 3 and the minus 40. Next, I'm going to divide both of them by the a term, by the 5. So there we go. And I'm going to look, can 3/5 be simplified? No, but it's also a fraction. I can't have that. So I'm going to take this 5, move him up here. And when I do, he is no longer underneath the 3. And then can 40 divided by 5 be simplified? Sure, that's an 8. So I just have x minus 8. And again, it's the exact same number that you had before. All right, there you go. Which method was your favorite? I want you to go and practice. Find a method that works for you and stick with that one. All right, go have some fun.